Welcome back, everybody, to the My Generation podcast. On today's episode of the show, we're talking with a returning podcast guest. It's Leo Ulph. We had him on episode 19 of the podcast. He was talking about his music creating process on that episode of the show, but we're taking another turn into another one of his passions. We're talking collecting of the 1970s Star Wars figures. Welcome back to the show, Leo.
Hello, Max, and you know, I can't believe you just said that. So you've had about 50 podcasts between the last time you and I spoke, right?
Yeah, the time has absolutely flown by. I mean, actually, like, putting a number on each episode makes me kind of realise how many we've done. Leo, you were in the first 20 episodes, and it's been a long time since then. So how have you been?
Well, I was there at the start, wasn't I? It's been busy times. Lots of since we've spoken, the world's turned upside down, hasn't it? So there's that. But I've still been able to work, thankfully, which I'm really thankful for, doing my radio things. And yes, of course, one thing that lockdown has brought for, I think, loads of us, Max, isn't it, is brings back little passions and stuff that we might have not had time for, before we were sort of sat at home not doing very much. And for me, collecting's taken over again, isn't it?
Yep, I couldn't agree more. I mean, as I was saying just before we started the show, I've sort of been catching up on Star Wars: The Clone Wars Season 7 because I've had a bit of time to it, and then hearing that you had a passion about Star Wars, you know, I was on the hype for it. We've recently also recorded, only a couple of weeks ago this went out, the Lego episode of the show, episode 70. We talked about Lego Star Wars for about an hour, so we've been talking about it very recently. Now, before we get into the bulk of the chat with Leo, I do want to remind you all that as we're in sort of a newer format for the My Generation podcast, we have got some great new features coming to the show today. So we have Harry and Sammy who bring film and album reviews every week to the show, but we've also got Emma Cusson who does poetry readings, Joe Finnegan doing video game reviews, and Tom Axtell who brings a brand new pirate fact or profile every single week on the show. So stay tuned for those little features throughout the show as we go in and around this chat about Star Wars collecting. So Leo, I really wanted to start with how you got into collecting. Has it been something that's been a part of your whole life, or is it sort of been a recent passion you've picked up?
I think looking back, as human beings, we kind of have a proclivity towards collecting. I don't know what that might be, but I certainly know as a child, when it was kind of toys and figures and anything that was affiliated to something I really enjoyed, generally sort of cartoons or films or sports, I wanted to have a little bit of it. Do you know what I mean? So, and Star Wars has always been a massive passion of mine, especially the kind of the original trilogy, as I suppose they're known. So I guess how do people know them now? Episodes 4, 5, 6. So New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi. And I was very, very, very young. But you know, the embers of those figures were around when I was a kid, and Star Wars was such a passion for me. So I remember getting a few of them when I was a lot younger. And I just wanted to collect, Max. I loved them. They were kind of, if you love Star Wars, the films have been made, haven't they? So you can't sort of ongoingly kind of enjoy them. You can, I suppose, with films, but you need a little memento. And for me, those little plastic lumps, that was that memento.
Yeah, and it sort of allows you to create your own stories, really, with it, doesn't it? That's what Lego was like for me. You could go beyond the story of the film.
You can, you're absolutely right, and toys in their absolute essence are supposed to be kind of expansions of your imagination and taking things into a different realm, which is absolutely wonderful. But I think as well, there's an element to it's like a commitment, isn't it? It's a commitment to the cause. If you like the films, right, I'm going to show how much I like these films by actually getting little talismans and little token things to show how much I like. And I think there's a lot of that in there, isn't it? You know, there's it's basically saying, this is how much I like something. I've actually purchased and got memorabilia. So you're almost judged how much you like something by the size of your collection, which is kind of perverse, but I think there's something to it. Yeah,
well, certainly. I think that because Star Wars has so many different ways for you to enjoy it too, because you've enjoyed it through these action figures. Now, were these the Kenner Toy Company ones, from 78 to 85? Was it that series that you collected?
Absolutely right. Yeah, well, and still do. And I tell you, well, yes. I'm sure we'll carry on the conversation, but yes.
Yeah, because they had like over 100 unique figures, and they sort of varied in terms of like value and collecting. So it almost a certain part of the passion about it is trying to collect all of those figures. It must be such a journey for you to try and find places to find these pieces of history.
Absolutely right. And the thing that you've got with these is that you get into this hobby. I first got into the hobby again. So I basically I had I had the toys when I was a kid, but then of course, you hear stories, don't you, about people's parents selling things off at boot fairs and blah blah blah. And to a certain extent, the same sort of thing happened with me. I didn't have all that many when I was a kid, but around about sort of 5-10 years ago, I really had a passion with a friend of mine to sort of start getting things back again, and I did do that. And as I realised, looking into it, with the age of the internet and being able to discover things, I'm sure this is the same with other toy lines and other sort of collectible markets, there were things like variations I had absolutely no idea about. And you're right, Max, there's 92 figures, and they go from 1997 to 1985, but within that, my goodness, there's a huge amount of rarity, there's a huge amount of variation. For example, on a classic example, people would like to collect things on their cards. That makes sense, doesn't it? They're called mint on cards, so they're in their bubble. I'm doing my credibility no good here, but I don't care, frankly. But so, for example, you talk about the Kenner ones. They were on Kenner cards, but it turns out, of course, Star Wars being a multi-cultural and country phenomena. Different countries, of course, wanted a different piece of the pie. So in England, for example, it wasn't Kenner. A little company called Palitoy, based in Leicester, bought the rights to this humongous franchise. Somehow, they chanced it. Nobody knew how big Star Wars was going to be, so they bought the merchandise. And so this little tiny company in Leicester had the keys to this behemoth. So they put their little logo on it, Palitoy, and of course these things are as rare as hen's teeth. Now, it's normal Star Wars cards with Palitoy on, and they are worth an absolute fortune. Likewise, you go over to Germany, there's a place called Harbert, and Takahara in Japan. So, just for the card, Max, themselves, the variety and the scope for collecting is humongous.
Yeah, and I've sort of been in the business of Lego with it and collecting, and I've seen how once a set goes into retirement, especially the Star Wars stuff, its value just shoots through the roof. Yeah. Obviously, one of your favourite movies, Empire Strikes Back, the Cloud City Lego set, the original one from 2002. I think it cost about $100 retail, but to get it sealed in the box now, it's like $3,000. It's crazy the value. Why do you think Star Wars is something that's appreciating so much?
It's a brilliant question, which takes me exactly back to what I was saying. So I did this maybe sort of 10 years ago, and I bought lots of stuff, and I accrued, the bits of rarity. I got most of the full loose set, which I wanted to get, and I got a few carded ones, especially some of these Palitoy ones. And, it was good money, Max. For paying something very rare, you were perhaps paying anywhere from, let's just say, 100 to 300 quid for pretty rare stuff. Now, you then flash forward 10 years, we've had 3 new Star Wars films. We've had a whole new generation of kids that are growing up with Star Wars. We've had, as you said, Clone Wars. We've had cartoons, all sorts of stuff. It has not left the zeitgeist. And all of a sudden, it's just shot up in value. So the same things you would be buying for £100, £300 10 years ago is probably, I've never seen ever appreciation like this, maybe in stocks, but you're looking into the thousands. You're genuinely looking into the thousands. And I think, to answer your question, it's something that's never gone away. It seems to be really fluid and stays with families and with children. And it's one of the first things that we were playing with as kids, both of us, Max, that our kids will be playing with. I think it's just an enduring quality. And people then want something that symbolises that. And if it's a rarity, if it becomes an antique, well, there you go. That's where the money goes, I think.
Yeah, it is incredible. And the reason why I brought up the Clone Wars Season 7 is because, it only sort of finished about a month ago. And it was an incredibly emotional finale. Now, I'm not going to spoil it, but there are some really nice tie-ins to the prequels and the original trilogy, and what it does weaving stuff together. And it made me feel emotions for new sides of those stories. And we're talking, this came out in 2020. And yeah, it's still bringing up those emotions in fans. So yeah, I think you're right. It's never going to go away.
No, It's incredible. I've noticed, actually, it's funny when you go into toy shops these days, and I look around, and I do see so many of the things that I played with as kids. You know, you've got things that I know we're talking Star Wars, obviously, which we will, but there's you still have Star Wars. You still have things like the Teenage Turtles are still big. You have things like, obviously, Lego is timeless, isn't it? But you know, my parents to a certain extent were sort of playing with a cup and ball. You know what I mean? Just throwing things against the wall. Whereas I think it's sort of my generation and our generation are moving forwards. And yeah, and as you said, linked back, nostalgia. So linked from a 2020 cartoon all the way back to a 70s film. That's unheard of, isn't it?
Well, it's unheard of to actually make it so emotionally investable too, because it's not like it's just a cheesy connection. These are things that people are still caring about, and that's crazy to me. Well, Leo, in just a moment, I want to ask you about what specifically is so special about the film A New Hope. But before I ask Leo that question, we're going to be going to two of our features here in today's show. So we have Sammy Bacon and Harry Monday, who bring album and film reviews every week to the show, as you know, here on a Thursday on the My Generation podcast. And here is the album that Sammy recommends this week.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Sammy Bacon here to recommend you an album from the legendary indie funk band Parquet Courts. If you don't know who Parquet Courts are, what the hell are you doing? Listen to Parquet Courts, man. Anyway, I'm recommending you their latest to date 6th studio album, Wide Awake. Wide Awake is the best album in the Parquet Courts catalogue, and moves on and evolves their original hard punk aesthetics, adding in funk elements and a strong emphasis on grooves. And that's what Andrew Savage of Parquet Courts said in an interview on KEXP, that was one of the focuses of the album. And you really hear that it's a groovy, funky, punky album, and it brings in more complex instrumentations such as omnichords, synths, pianos, keyboards, etc. And this album blends social commentary, but there are several introspective moments, and this album is just so tight. Oh, it's so well played, it's so well produced, it's amazing. The album kicks off with the song Total Football, which is a song about unity, I guess, and working for each other. If you don't know about Total Football was a Dutch football concept in the 1970s, where every outfield player could play in every position. So it's this idea that in society we must be total football-esque and support each other. But it's also a song about how we must have freedom in society, and that collectivism, and there's one line where Andrew Savage sings, collectivism and autonomy are not mutually exclusive, clearly saying that we can still have freedom and be ourselves and have our own identity, but still support each other. But then there are more introspective moments like Tenderness and Mardi Gras Beads. Mardi Gras Beads is this washed out, shoegazy kind of, I read it as a love song, but I think you probably read it as anything. And then there's the track Death Will Bring Change, which is about co-guitarist Austin Brown losing his sister in a car crash and coming to terms with that. There's also Freebird 2, which is another introspective moment on the track, and I think is about kind of looking back on your past and where you've come from and who you are now. It's a great song. I saw them at End of the Road Festival in 2019. They put on a fantastic live show. Parquet Courts, Wide Awake. Please listen to it. Great album. See you next time.
Thank you for that, Sammy, and we'll tune in with Sammy next week to find out what his next album review is. If you've got an album that you would like Sammy to review, you can get in touch with the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast and let us know if you enjoy the albums he recommends here on today's show. Now, Harry Monday, he does film reviews here every single Thursday on the show. Here is the film that Harry recommends for us this week.
This week's film recommendation is probably one you've already heard of. It is the Netflix original Extraction. Now, we live in a sort of age where the action movies are coming into a new renaissance after the John Wick series of movies. It's just redefined how to do action in movies. And Extraction is the next step towards that new age, where John Wick decided to add more flashy lights and a more neon synth background element to it to make it a bit more stylized. Extraction just removes that, brings it back to the action and brings it back to the gunfight. It's just a simple story of an Afghan soldier rescuing an Indian child in the middle of what is a war zone. And to still even have an ending this day that I find dramatic and I still shed a tear to is immense. So this week's film recommendation is Extraction.
Thank you for that, Harry, and we'll tune in with Harry next week to find his next film recommendation. Coming up later in the show, we've got Emma Cusson's poetry readings, Joe Finnegan's video game reviews, and Tom Axtell's pirate profiles, all coming up later on the My Generation podcast. But now, going back to Leo, I did want to ask, obviously, as we did before the section, what do you think is so special about A New Hope? Why did it take off in the way it did?
Number of reasons, in my opinion, Max. I think, firstly, there had never been anything that tried to attempt anything so sort of technologically spectacular. And it really was, for the time, it was properly out there. And it didn't look like it was sort of just sort of things on a green screen or whatever it was at the time. It started a whole universe. But I think, importantly, and I've debated this a lot actually and read a lot about it, what it very, very cleverly does, Star Wars, is it doesn't intrinsically reinvent the wheel. It's actually, it's a fairy tale in space. And fairy tales has been with us forever. So it has, the prince, Luke Skywalker. It's got the kind of roguish, out there kind of, helpful buddy guy. He's a little bit good, he's a little bit bad, Han Solo. It's got the Black Knight, Darth Vader. It has all of these elements to it. Then if you set it in space, which of course in the 70s space was kind of space races and a huge thing, and all kids like space and sci-fi and exciting, you marry the two together and it's just the perfect combination, isn't it? And it sings to, just because of its subject matter, I think it sings to kids and adults alike. I think that's why it works.
Yeah, and I think it's got such an expanded universe. Every single scene you go into, it's brimming with life. There's so much there, and I think that's why the spin-offs have at least been so successful, because there's so many routes you can go around. Now, another reason I wanted to bring up the Clone Wars Season 7 is because the character of Ahsoka Tano in there has an incredible character arc. She goes from when she first appeared in the Clone Wars movie in 2008, being the most annoying character to the Star Wars community, to today, as a result of the Clone Wars and as a result of Star Wars Rebels, being one of the most loved characters in the whole of the Star Wars community. I wanted to know from you, Leo, what has been your favourite character, and has that sort of changed throughout the years?
I never even thought of it that way. I think I always liked Luke Skywalker. I mean, to be honest, it's very interesting this actually, because I've always been a fan of the original three. The prequels didn't do it for me. I thought they were messy. Only in my opinion. Ben George Lucas probably doesn't care, but in my opinion, perhaps the Revenge of the Sith kind of went some way to working its way back. And then you had the next lot, where we've just had, I can't remember what they're called, Force Awakens, blah, 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 blah. I've always liked Luke Skywalker. I don't know. I'm a sort of bit of a sucker for someone that goes on a journey. You know what I mean? It's that sort of journey of discovery. And I think I really like the idea that Luke Skywalker basically is us through those first three films. We start off naive, just looking at what's going around us, and by the end, you've kind of achieved some kind of enlightenment, and I like that. I like that arc. I like that as kind of a human journey, I suppose.
Yeah, and obviously it sort of shows in the Kenner toys and their popularity, because he's one of the rarer ones. Do you have that Luke Skywalker toy?
10 years ago, Max, I had 3 of them. I sold them all off. They are worth... It's unbelievable. Interestingly, they've just released really nicely a thing called... because Hasbro have taken over... They bought Kenner out a long time ago, and they've just released a retro collection, which is really nice. So they've got them on their old cards, and they've kind of sort of digitally sort of folded the edges so they look a bit crumpled. And I just bought myself a Luke one the other day, actually, which is really nice. It looks exactly the same. So that's the Luke that I've got. You're right, very, very expensive. The other one that is, one of the pinnacles, and always will be for some reason, is Boba Fett.
Yeah.
Huge. Max, absolutely. I watched on eBay, I can say this, I watched one on eBay the other day. It was a foreign card. It went for £10,000.
There's just something about the mysterious characters, isn't it? The bounty hunter side of Star Wars. It's the reason why The Mandalorian got made as a TV show just about it. There's so much there. And another one of sort of the rarer ones was Bib Fortuna as well. Another one in sort of that criminal underworld. What is that's so popular?
You're right. I tell you what I think it is because they're actually kind of left with quite a lot of mystery, aren't they? This was a really interesting decision for me from Kenner, because everyone who doesn't know, there was a second wave, so they had the first 12, the kind of big main characters they released, and they started to kind of, obviously, it was a success, and they started to release other characters. And the bounty hunters, if you remember, Max, if you watch Empire Strikes Back, you don't really see them. You've got a situation where they have to, where Darth Vader is kind of saying, we have to capture Han Solo. And there's just this lineup of these bizarre characters, one of which is Boba Fett. You see more of Boba Fett later on, obviously, Return of the Jedi. But I think it's the mystique, Max, that goes with it. I mean, you see these characters for a second, and they made a figure out of them, and you just know that kids were thinking at the time, well, we don't know what they're like. We can imbue our own characters, our own personalities to them. And I think that's what's so enduring. There's a degree of screen rarity that then kind of transfers itself to, I must have that in physical form, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what also really helps them, I think, is that they have now some of them been covered in the TV series, and they've done them justice. So I think Bosk appears in the Clone Wars alongside Cad Bane, who was a newer sort of pirate character. You don't see IG-88 specifically in The Mandalorian, but you see an IG droid, and you get to see how they work and how they fight. And that's fascinating, because I feel like, because you spend all these years wondering, finally getting to see them is just something so special, isn't it? Like the idea of having that, and then it comes out finally, and I think that's something special the TV series has done alongside the mainline films, really.
That's fabulous, and I haven't seen those, Max, so I'm going to have to. I think what a great idea to flesh things out. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, and it's just so special. So I've got a couple more questions still for Leo about diving into specifically why we do collecting. I think I'd like to sort of dive behind the psychology of our collecting habits for a moment as we sort of come toward the end of the show. But we're now going to be going to our newer features here on the show. It's Emma Cusson, Joe Finnegan, and Tom Axtell. They've only recently joined the podcast, so please do let me know what you think of all of their wonderful new features here on the show, bringing a lot of life and different variety every single week. Emma Cusson, we always start with in this part of the show. She does poetry readings. She's actually performed at Bramley's in Canterbury at the Bramley Sessions and in the area of Thanet as well. And every week on the show, she now shares one of her personal poem collection. And here is the poem that Emma would love to share this week.
I wonder if you'll notice the start of less, the end in absence. Declining of late-night drives where exchanges of cigarettes and relatable memories were only relevant. If you'll notice, I'll get comfortable elsewhere in the room because I'm too perturbed to brush up against you again. Who am I kidding? This wouldn't have advanced to intimacy. I wondered if you ever noticed my little gestures, that my dreams and perfect evenings I adapted all to what I wanted with you. I wonder if you noticed how lonely I felt in your presence, because I knew I never belonged. That when the nights drew in, you never said goodnight, you always said goodbye. This poem is called Little Gestures, and I wrote it about the struggles of dating.
Thank you for that, Emma, and we'll tune in with Emma next week to find out what her next poetry reading will be. Do let us know in the comments, whether you're listening on YouTube, SoundCloud or Spotify, what you think of Emma's poems, or you can go to the Facebook page at the My Generation Podcast. Next, we're moving over to Joe Finnegan. He does video game reviews every week here on the show from different genres. I mean, one week we'll have to get him to recommend Star Wars Battlefront and why you should play that, but there's so much variety. He does PC, console, different genres of games, so that you have a complete variety of games to choose from and play. And here is the game that Joe recommends this week.
Here's Max. Today I'm recommending probably my favourite game of the last few years, which is Rocket League. The best way to describe this is cars playing football, which kind of sounds ridiculous, but the concept actually works so well. You can play in 1v1, 2v2 or 3v3 matches online with friends or strangers. There is a single player option, but I found myself ignoring this after a while as the computer AI isn't that great. There is a massive skill curve, and this is definitely one of those games that's easy to learn but difficult to master. The physics of the game feels very realistic, or at least as realistic as you can imagine for cars driving into massive footballs. I've put hundreds of hours into this game. I'm still learning new tricks now that allow me to get one up over on my opponents. You can find tons of montage clips on YouTube, which will give you an idea of the range of skill people actually have in the game. Massive warning though, it is hugely addictive. There's been so many times I've jumped on just planning to play a game or two for 5 minutes, but you keep getting that itch for one more game before you know it's 1 a.m. Rocket League is currently available for PC, PS4, Nintendo Switch and Xbox One for around £15, and it also allows cross-platform play. So for example, as a PlayStation 4 player, you could team up with your Xbox friend online.
Thank you for that, Joe, and we'll tune in with Joe next week to find out what his next video game recommendation is. And our last feature, before we go back to Leo to talk about why we collect and bring the show to a close, it's Tom Axtell. He does pirate profiles and facts here on the show, so every single week you can find out something new. We found out on the 1 year anniversary special that Tom was a bit of a pirate fanatic and actually knows quite a lot about pirates and their history, so that you can learn something about the past that maybe you didn't know. And here is the pirate that Tom would like to talk about this week.
Hello, and welcome to Tom's Prolific Pirate Profiles. Today, we are talking about Charles Vane. Charles Vane arrived at Port Royal in the Caribbean sometime around 1701 to 1714. He joined the crew of a Henry Jennings in 1716, who was based in the pirate port of Nassau. In the July of the year prior, a Spanish treasure fleet was hit by a hurricane off the coast of Florida, dumping tons of gold and silver not far from the shore. The ship which carried Vane was one of the first to reach the site, and they managed to leave with around £87,000 in gold and silver. 1718, and King George I offers a pardon to all pirates. Vane's captain, Jennings, accepts this pardon, leaving Vane in charge of a sloop named the Lark. Vane started to compile a new crew, with some notable pirates such as Edward England and Jack Rackham. Vane was back in the seas, capturing merchant ships. Him and his crew treated their captured ships cruelly, and Vane may even have halted merchant travelling in the Bahamas entirely. The recent governor of the Bahamas, was Rogers, at this time started to arrive in the pirate haven of Nassau in July 1718. With a plan to escape, Vane waited till dark. He set his flagship aflame and sailed it towards the Navy ships blocking the exit. The flaming ship allowed Vane and his crew to escape through the breach created. Vane soon met with Edward Teach, Blackbeard. He tried to convince Blackbeard to take back Nassau, but Blackbeard was not interested, so they parted ways. Soon, Vane came into contact with a French warship, who he quickly attacked. Noticing he was outgunned, Vane decided to flee. His crew, wanting to attack, was unhappy with Vane's decision. Jack Rackham reportedly said that though she had more guns and a greater weight of metal, they might board her, and then the best boys would carry the day. The crew's unhappiness with Vane turned into a mutiny, deposing Vane and electing Rackham to lead. Vane and 15 men were given a sloop, and the two groups of pirates went their separate ways. Vane continued to capture ships, but soon hit a hurricane just off Honduras, and was left shipwrecked on an island. After a few days, a ship arrived and picked him up. This being a British ship, Vane used the pretense of being from a trading sloop. Soon enough, however, he was recognised, put in chains, and taken to Spanish Town in Jamaica. On the 29th of March, 1721, Charles Vane was hanged, and his body was hung from a gibbet in Port Royal as a warning to others. And that is the story of Charles Vane.
Thank you for that, Tom. We'll tune in with Tom next week to find out the next pirate fact or profile. I hope you're enjoying all of the new features here on the show. Now moving back to Leo. Leo, I'd love to talk about why do we collect? Why do I have so much Lego in my room that I've had to box some of it up because it's fallen off the shelves? Why do you have all of these unique models that are so scarce? Why do we do it?
Do you know what? That's such a tricky question, tricky and easy question to answer, I suppose. I think in terms of collecting say things that when we were children, for example. So I don't know whether your Lego collecting is because you had Lego as a child. Is there something to do with that, or is it something you got into later on?
No, I collected it as a child. Similar with you, collected it as a child. Then I had a bit of a gap, and then I sort of rekindled that love. I used to do Lego animation. In fact, if you want to know my story, check out episode 69 of the podcast, because I go into my full Lego story if you want to know more details. But yeah, do go on.
Yes, definitely do. And well, there you go. I mean, that echoes my exact situation, doesn't it? And I think there's certainly a degree of nostalgia. We, as human beings, we love nostalgia. And so the idea of being able to recreate and go back to a time that we were perhaps happier, things were a little bit easier, and where there was kind of that unadulterated sort of sense of joy and fun. So I think there is that, but to a certain extent, for you with your Lego and we with my little Star Wars toys, but also, tell you what I think it is. If you're connecting something specific, like you with Lego or me with Star Wars or football, for example, maybe it'd be football programs or whatever it might. I think it shows a sense of allegiance. I think we all, again, as human beings, we're going to psychology, Max, we all like to align to a team, don't we? And I think that sort of if you collect something, it sort of shows a degree of allegiance to something. And also, within that, there's that competitive element of, I'm a better collector than you, I've got better stuff, I've got rarer stuff. There's a sense of achievement as well. So if you do get something, as you said, you've got your Lego thing that's gone up to $3,000. If you got that for a lot cheaper than it's supposed to be, for you, there's that real sense of achievement of financially getting something that's worth more. Honestly, the tangents are huge. It's almost impossible to say. But all of that's in there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think there's something about that chase, isn't it? Having the next thing to aspire to get. So for you, I imagine there's the next character always to get. I did actually want to know what the rarest one you actually currently own is.
We did have one called Yakface, who is on Jabba's barge for less than a nanosecond, right? And this I find this just fascinating psychologically. I did have him. I haven't got him anymore. At the moment, the rarest thing I have is I've purchased recently a Palatoy Imperial Commander, and I'm keeping hold of that. I think that's going to go, financially, that's going to raise, I think. So I'm really happy with that. I wanted to get one of those back. But the really interesting thing about this, again, psychologically, Max, is that the last lot of Star Wars figures, generally speaking, are the rarest. And completely perversely, that's because by the time it got to 1985, Return of the Jedi had been made 2 years previous. There wasn't so much of a hunger for Star Wars, but they were still desperately trying to churn out toys. And these things didn't get bought by anybody. They sat on the pegs, they went in the basement bins and the bargain bins. And of course, nobody bought them. They weren't in anybody's collections. So when it comes round to wanting to get things 10, 15 years later, when this all starts, they weren't around anywhere because nobody had them. So they become rare, which is incredible, isn't it, really?
Interesting, yeah. The sort of scarcity of certain things is incredible, because I've noticed sometimes with Lego sets, there'll be one that sort of really sticks out in terms of value, and you're wondering what made it so popular. And I think a set that I've got is... I forget its exact name. It's the one that's got Admiral Thrawn in. It was a Star Wars Rebels set with Ezra and Thrawn in a little ship. And that set was extremely expensive for what you got, and there weren't too many on shelves, and Thrawn's figure's already starting to go up, and it's just crazy to watch something I own like that. I'm seeing this figure rise and rise and rise just because he's such a beloved Star Wars character. It's crazy, isn't it?
100% crazy. And there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to how things certainly go. As you said, in that case, with Thrawn, and then you've got Boba Fett, and then you've got ones that rise because nobody wanted them when they initially came out. That's what collecting's all about, Max. And yes, there's a certain degree of financial. You're almost playing the stock market to a certain extent. You get something at a certain price, and you see how much it's going to go up for, and don't necessarily want to sell it, but there is something within that to kind of, to look at what it's worth and what it could be worth and what it used to be worth. So there's honestly so much of human psychology goes into collecting that we don't even understand. But you know what? It's fun, isn't it?
Yeah, and I honestly don't think I'll be doing any selling with my Lego. So I look at the value and I'm just like, yeah, it's cool, but I don't think I'll get rid of any of these hundreds of boxes. But Leo, yeah, such an amazing chat. So great to talk about collecting, and Star Wars again. It's a fascinating one for me. Now I've got one more question for Leo before we sort of bring the show to the close. But there are still topics that I'm coming up in the future that I would love to look for people to talk about. I want to talk to more musicians or people from different parts of the music industry. If you're between the ages of 18 and 35 and live in Kent, get in touch with that Facebook page at the My Generation podcast. The link is in the description. And Leo, he was one of the very first people we spoke to about their music creating process on episode 19. So if you want to hear more of Leo, please do go back to that episode. And just before I ask Leo my final question, I just wanted to tease ahead to a few more topics that I've got coming up on the My Generation podcast in the next couple of weeks. So Aaron Frith, we're going to be talking to him about being an extra in feature films. He was an extra in 1917 and Christopher Robin, and we're going to be talking about what it was like being on set with that incredible lineup of actors behind the scenes, what it was all like. Next week we're talking to Emily Cook about Doctor Who again. We're going part 2 on that. We're going to be celebrating Doctor Who lockdown and what they have been doing. But my last question, Leo, what do you think you've sort of learned by talking about Star Wars collecting here on today's show?
What have I learned? Just tell you what I've learned there is that you're doing something very similar, and I tell you, very interesting, that idea that you just said about this is something that gets mirrored, and I didn't realise this, is that people will collect something when they're younger, then seem to take a gap and then go back to it again, which is what you've done, isn't it, with your Lego? I think that's very, very interesting. I don't really know anybody that kind of collects something and then just carries on all the way through. I think I've learned, really, that it's something that you can potentially dip in and out of. And it might be something that sort of follows how your life goes. So I really like that. I think I've also learned, really, that it's very, very nice, especially if you can afford to do so, to find another way to kind of enhance what it is that you enjoy. We both enjoy Star Wars, and we choose to enjoy it in different ways and enhance it in different ways. You've got your Clone Wars, you've got your Lego, I've got my original trilogy, I've got my Kenner figures. It's lovely. It's all part of the same community, but we're doing it in a different way. I think that's really nice.
Yeah, that's so true. Such a great sort of point to end on, and I couldn't agree more about, I took a break away from it, and lockdown's actually, one of the silver linings is it lets you sort of rethink and go back to those things that maybe when you were sort of in the autopilot of life missed. And I've definitely gone back to my Star Warsy roots. I've rewatched a lot of the movies on Disney Plus that I finally caved in and bought. Not sponsored by Disney Plus, but I did get Disney Plus, I will admit. But that concludes this week's episode of the show. Thank you so much for coming back on, Leo.
It's an absolute pleasure, Max. Thank you. What you do is fantastic. So, yes, please, listeners, listen to more of Max's podcasts.
Oh, you're far too kind. I'm blushing on this side. Thank God this is a radio show. And, Leo, can people find you anywhere? What social media platforms are you on?
Wow, let me think. Yes, do come and find me on Instagram, actually. Leo Ulph1, LeoUlph1. I kind of host a lot of my radio show promotion from there as well. And if you want to come and listen to my music, then come and find Wake Up Leo on any of those platforms as well.
And that is the band that he speaks about on episode 19, so please go back and check out that episode. I'm going to put it in the description along with all of Leo's socials so you can find him there. Thank you all so much for listening to this week's episode of the show. We've got Aaron Frith, Emily Cook and Connor Jenkins all coming up on the show very, very soon. And it is a goodbye from Leo.
Cheerio, Max. Pleasure. Thank you, mate.
Thank you very much for coming on, and we'll tune in with you all next Thursday for the next episode of the My Generation podcast.